Wonderful. Thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you for the invitation to talk here today. As mentioned, I'm the manager of the Australian Space Discovery Centre, coming to you live from Adelaide, and I'd like to start by paying my respects to the traditional custodians of the land that I'm on, which is the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains, paying my respect to the elders past, present and future. Now, I will dive into this and I will get into the space industry eventually, but I'm going to share with you a part of my journey. I don't know if the presenters today will agree, but I think I have the best job in the world. I work for the Australian Space Agency. I have a lot of fun working here. But this was absolutely not my plan when I started to think about what I'm going to do for my career. And I'm going to take you through that journey today as we go along. But I first of all wanted to just ask or get yourselves to do a bit of self-reflection. A bit of self-reflection. So if you are with a group of other people, I want you to think about there will be some people among you, and there's certainly some people in my friendship groups who throughout their secondary school journey knew exactly what course they wanted to do. They knew exactly what degree they wanted to do to get a perfect job, and they've gone down that path. And I'm very jealous of those people. So it'd be interesting among yourselves, ask your teachers, ask your friends whether they're that category. But I myself am from the other category. So I just a couple of months ago celebrated being alive for 1 billion seconds, which means I'm 31 and a half years old. I have led a career of very varied things, which got me to where I am today, and I still don't really know what I want to do when I grow up. But I had a pretty good journey along the way. And this is a couple of photos. One of me about 10 years ago. My first job was in Australian Geographic Retail. I wanted to work there because I could work with telescopes. I could tell people about telescopes and talk with space. And now, 10 years later, I'm the manager of the Australian Space Discovery Centre here with a wonderful team of space communicators. This photo on the right is our day one, our opening day, which was the 5th of May this year. And it might seem like there's a reasonably straightforward link to the photo on the left, which I should explain, by the way, that the mascot of the Australian Geographic Retail was a platypus. So I used to have to dress up with a platypus, but had the job because I love talking about telescopes and about space. It seems like there's a relatively straightforward link between the two of these things. One is talking about space in terms of astronomy. The other is talking about space, which I will discuss later on, is more about space industry, space technologies, not so much the observational astronomy side of things. And it seems like there's a straightforward link between the two, but my career pathway is absolutely not straightforward. So I'm going to take you on that journey. And it's a journey of indecision. I never really knew what I wanted to do as a career. So I always sat on the fence and did probably many things. One of those, actually starting off, my careers advisor thought I should get into finance or accounting. And I love maths, I love science, but I didn't think that was me. So I was fascinated by space and started doing a Bachelor of Science in Astronomy and Astrophysics. But I also had a passion for history. So I also did a Bachelor of Ancient History, focusing in archaeology and in particular Egyptology, because I thought it was curious. I thought it would be cool to learn how to read and write Egyptian hieroglyphs. And I can now confirm it is very cool to be able to read and write Egyptian hieroglyphs. So I started doing 2 degrees, partly because I didn't know what I wanted to do when I finished. Here is a beautiful Venn diagram showing those degrees, and I found a little tiny intersection, which was being able to study astronomy in ancient Egypt, a very niche research area, which I should highlight has absolutely nothing to do with aliens. Please don't ask about aliens in the questions at the end. Aliens don't come into any of that discussion. But I found this very niche area, and I guess part of my story as well, I've always been lucky to find a career where I'm driven by passion, driven by something that I love doing. And through that, I found that I've always kept engaged because I've been doing something that I absolutely love. And so this niche of astronomy in ancient Egypt found myself in Egypt on many occasions. I've actually been there 8 times now. But there's a wonderful connection in terms of astronomical alignments where this ancient temple, this one, for example, Karnak Temple, which is at least 4,000 years old, aligns to the solstice or the sun rising on the December solstice. And back on this day in 2015, I was with a few thousand other people, which now seems a bit weird in the COVID environment to see so many people in the one photo. But to witness this combination of my passions of history as well as astronomy. So we went there in the morning. This was the so-called doomsday, the end of the Mayan sunrise. And as is absolutely the documented case, the sun rises exactly in line with this temple, which has its own sort of historical and religious significance. And this will get back to space eventually. There's another temple as well, this one, the Temple of Jarabahri. I think it was the day after we went and saw the same thing, so much we felt like a little group of paparazzi, but standing in the axis of the temple, looking out the doorway, the sun rises directly through the doorway, brightens the inner chapel, and the sun would have shone on the statues in there and given them a renewed power and renewed life, which is probably a discussion for another time in the future. So I found this little niche area. I love history, I love astronomy, and I was able to pursue this in the field. I also, 5 years ago, started a PhD which looks into the sort of the astronomical understandings of many religious texts. So this is one of the tombs inside the Valley of the Kings, and all over the walls are examples of Egyptian descriptions of where the sun goes after it sets. It went through the underworld, and there's a lot of science hidden in there, which I will eventually turn into a PhD. I have enough words, I just have to make sure they're the right words before I submit them. So this was my passion. I loved researching this in ancient Egypt, and I found that there was a niche area, and I found that people wanted to hear about that. So I also have spent a lot of time presenting my research. I did this throughout Australia, as well as overseas. Went to a conference in America a couple of years ago, and I guess I'm also very lucky that I've found something that I really enjoy doing and found something that people like listening to. So it appears through these images, I like to talk with my hands. That happens a lot. But I guess the takeaway here is I found something that I love, and I found something that I could pursue with a passion. So it never really felt like work because I love doing it. My travels to Egypt also spread into archaeology. So this is me a few years ago working in a tomb site that Macquarie University is excavating. It's the tomb of Amenemope, who is a man who lived in the order of about 3,000, it says on the screen, 1100 BCE. So 3,000 years ago, a person was buried here. And what Macquarie Uni doing is a sort of salvage mission to trying to figure out what has been left over, what survives, and what we can reconstruct. And we're doing some really cool work trying to reconstruct his family tree. So that's one side of things. That sort of fulfills my need for pursuing ancient history. But on the other side, actually no, and on this as well, I before COVID had a really nice sort of year where I would spend a month or two in Egypt excavating and pursuing this side of things. And then I'll come back home, do my studies, and also found a job at this place, which is Sydney Observatory, just there in the rocks. A wonderful building. If no one has ever been, wait until you can go outdoors to explore, and you can learn about all of the history of astronomy in Australia. So I started working here, and I worked here for 7 years, and my job here was an astronomy educator. So I was paid to tell people about space, and absolutely loved doing that every day. I got to the point where I started building programs and building experiences. It wasn't only space that we were talking about. We had programs in meteorology and programs in history and archaeology, and also in Indigenous Dreamtime stories. So I had a lot of fun there. And I guess this fulfilled my passion in talking about space as well, much like my first job at Australian Geographic. When I came here, people liked to learn about this, and I got paid to tell them about it and had a lot of fun along the way. This is inside one of the telescope domes, that telescope dome that's closest to us. There's a telescope from 1874. It was put there for the transit of Venus, which is when Venus passes between us and the sun. It was a significant event in the 1870s, and then 120 years before that was also a significant event in Captain Cook coming to Australia, among other projects as well. But yeah, it was my job to talk about space, to get people engaged with space, and this is still more of the astronomy side of things. Had a lot of fun doing it, did it for a while, and very much miss it. But you will discover if you ever talk to me about space that I dive back into that passion and very much love talking about it. So my career sort of then moved into this education side of things. And then beyond that, I stepped more into perhaps the tourism side or education on a bigger scale. A couple of years ago, I took a number of school students to space camp in the southern USA. They went through a sort of astronaut training program, and I out-nerded all of them. I think I beat them all, but I was the educator sort of chaperone there. So they were the ones who actually graduated. But again, it's the combination of space with something else. And there was a lot of wonderful things there that they like to show off, these rocket parks, and America is really leading the world in the space industry. And as I'll talk about later on, Australia is both catching up and focusing on our own niche areas. So there was this aspect of the space side of tourism, and then there was also an aspect of Egyptian tourism. So this was a tour that I led with astronomer at large Fred Watson, as well as his partner Maniog. We took a number of people around Egypt talking about the astronomical significance. And again, I'm both extremely lucky, but also tried very hard to get into a position where I can talk about the things that I love to people that want to hear that. And this was a very fun experience, which I did all of these things over the course of probably about a decade, and that gave me the skills that I needed to find this job at the Australian Space Agency. And as was highlighted before, I joined the Space Agency in January this year. It's been an incredible learning curve. We've opened a public institution in a COVID environment. We've locked down for a while, and we're sort of managing how do we get out of that at the moment. But again, it's a wonderful thing that part of my job, and a big part of my job, is to just talk about space and to talk to people like yourselves, opening the pathways or highlighting the opportunities that space will bring in the future. So the next few slides have a lot of information on them, but there's a couple of key takeaways that I want to highlight. I'm not sure if my mouse will be visible, but in the middle, on the 1st of July 2018, the Australian Space Agency was born. So we only celebrated our 3rd birthday this month. We're very young in the scheme of greater space agencies. And we have achieved a lot in a very short amount of time. So the other thing to highlight on this page on the bottom right-hand side is the Australian Civil Space Strategy. And this essentially is the government's plan for the next decade. And it outlines the direction that the Australian government is going to take and that the Australian Space Agency plays a role in. And part of that is to increase the capacity of people working in the space industry over the next decade. They'd like to create another 20,000 jobs in the space sector, which would total about 30,000 jobs in total. And as well as that, there's lifting the broader economy, adding several billion to the space industry too. And even though the Australian Space Agency is reasonably young, we do have a very strong and long history in space. So Australia was one of the first countries to launch a satellite in the 1960s, which is very impressive. Many people will hopefully know that Australia also played a role in receiving the first footage from the Apollo 11 moon landings that came through radio dishes in Australia. And throughout the past decades, we've had a strong contribution to worldwide space observations. And part of this is due to our geography. We are on the opposite side of the world to Europe and America. So we can see parts of space when those other nations cannot. To highlight the purpose, I will just read this off the screen. So the purpose of the Australian Space Agency is to transform and grow a globally respected Australian space industry that lifts the broader economy, inspires and improves the lives of Australians, underpinned by a strong national and international engagement. So we have ambitious plans to really, even though we're only a few years old, to really make our name on the world stage. And the Civil Space Strategy outlines these priority areas that I will not go into detail, but just highlight that there's particular things that Australia is very good at. There's niche technologies that we are world leaders and that we will be world leaders in. Things like robotics and automation. There are mines out in remote Australia that can operate almost without people. And this will become very useful if we eventually go down the path of mining on other planets or mining on asteroids for their gold or for their ore metals or things like that. So these are the strategy areas that Australia is focusing on, and each has a lot of discussion behind it, which I'm happy to talk about in detail, or you can go to space.gov.au to explore in more detail as well. So here we have another slide with a lot of information, but it just sort of outlines the responsibilities and values of the Australian Space Agency. So there's a lot of things that we're trying to do. And the one which I come into and which my team comes into is down the bottom on the responsibility side of things. Our goal is to inspire the Australian community. So we want to tell people about the stories of space, talk about space technologies, talk about Australians with careers in space. And that is where we come to the Australian Space Discovery Centre. So the Australian Space Discovery Centre was opened in May this year, and initially we do have quite a focus just locally because we are here, but over time we will engage on a national level. But just to highlight what we do here on site, the Space Discovery Centre is made up of 3 main components. So this is our space gallery. It has 21 ways to engage with space. Some of these touchscreen interactives, and they're all built by Questacon. So our goal here is to highlight the stories of space, to show Australian technologies, and really to inspire. So this exhibition is currently in Adelaide. There is also a duplicate exhibition in Questacon at the moment, which will be there for a year or so, and then we'll travel around Australia visiting different communities and other rural areas, again telling the story of space to everyone who wants to listen. One of the best parts, I think, about the Australian Space Discovery Centre is this window here. This is actually operable glass. A little flick of a switch on the wall there can make the screen opaque, so we can actually not see what's happening inside. But this is Australia's first publicly viewable mission control area. And on the other side of the glass there is a company called Sabre Astronautics. Among other things, they are responsible for visualizing satellite traffic management. On their screens there, they're also tracking solar data, so they're looking at space weather. And we here want to leverage that as much as possible. We want to show off exactly what they're doing in that room. At the moment, Tom, their flight commander, we're talking to him through the screen, so he's explaining what they're doing in there. And we're very excited to be able to show off their operations to a public audience, and over time we will turn this into a digital thing so that people around Australia can join in as well. And it's really exciting, I think, really inspiring to see that this is the time to be involved with space. Also, they're hiring at the moment. I believe they code in JavaScript, so that's something which is worth pointing out. And then the final component of the Space Discovery Centre is all about careers. So here I'm at the careers desk. We have a profile wall showing people who have careers in the space industry. One of those is an astronaut, but there are many others as well, which include space lawyers and doctors, and space has a role in farming, agriculture, and many other things as well. And here we want to not be a careers advisor as such, but to highlight just the pathways that are available to people, and to show people as well that space is not just being an astronaut. While that could be a very cool job to target towards, and I absolutely encourage you if you want to do that, it is also highlighting all these other opportunities. And these are growing as well. If you go to our website, which is discover.space.gov.au, scroll down a little bit and you can find yourself at this page. There's a lot of different things to explore here, but on the left-hand side is pathways for a career in space. So you can look up particular careers, just as an example, highlighting that space lawyer, space scientist, CNC machinist, and a range of other ones as well are there. It'll tell you what sort of things that you need to study, what you need to be good at, and some of the possible pathways. You can also explore people in the space sector. So this is a duplicate of what's on our profile wall, highlighting people in these jobs. You can search for space in your community, and this is showing throughout Australia where you can get involved with space, which could be astronomical societies, could be simply talk similar to this one, other people as well, industry events and things. So discover.space.gov.au is the place to explore these. Now, there is a video that I will not share at the moment, but I think we'll pass along in the chat. It's just talking about your possible careers in space, so possible pathways, which oops, not playing anyway. Possible pathways, which I hope just opens your eyes to the opportunities that are out there. And I want to also finish on just a thought, which is one that I'm going to borrow from one of my colleagues, Sam, and he says this wonderful thing in his presentation to the public, where you might be thinking about, you have a career pathway down cybersecurity, or later we might hear about Amazon Web Services, or as a some sort of data app analyst. And I just want to plant the seed that these jobs are all very exciting. It's wonderful to pursue these STEM careers, but think about how cool it is if you just plant the word space in front of those. So you can be a space data analyst, or a space, myself, a space manager, or a space engager, space communicators, which is the rest of our team. So this is where I will bring it to an end. Thank you for joining in. I think we have some time for questions along the way. And if you are ever in Adelaide, please come and visit us at the Australian Space Discovery Centre. Otherwise, discover.space.gov.au is the place to explore more about what we do.
Yeah, thank you. We have a few questions here for you today. Do you prefer studying about space or going to space?
That is a good question. I think one probably leads into the other one. We are in an interesting time at the moment where space tourism is starting, and people hopefully are aware of the work of Virgin Galactic and Blue Origin, where it is possible to visit space. I guess there's different pathways you can think about as well. If you want to go for the 3 or 4 minutes of zero gravity, that would be a wonderful experience if you can afford to do it. But personally, I think it would be more worthwhile to go down the path of studying so that you can contribute to these missions, so that you can spend a month on the International Space Station or on our moon base, if Elon Musk and SpaceX ever get their way of going to start a thing out there. So I guess it depends on your needs or your wants or your outcomes. But probably also depends on things like funding or timing or availability. And we're in a very exciting place at the moment, just to add on to my space career fact, where you might have a pathway that you're wanting to go down, but the space sector is exploding so quickly that in the next 10 years, part of these 20,000 jobs that we want to build, it's exciting that we don't even know what some of those jobs are yet, and we'll figure out those things as we start to become a space-faring society, as we start to venture towards the moon and beyond. Some of these jobs will need to be created and come out of nowhere. The very long answer. Sorry, I'll stop there.
That was really interesting, though. Yeah. Here's an interesting question. What type of content overlaps for ancient history and astronomy?
That is an interesting question. It's a very niche area, and one that I think there's a really interesting sort of directional thing here, where when you try to study history, you're always looking towards the past, but as I'm also in the space sector, it's very much forward-looking. So I think I found that little niche myself, and this is where my research went down, and part of that was driven just through curiosity of in space there's a curiosity of the unknown and what we do not know yet, but looking into the past there's a curiosity of trying to discover what was once known. So I guess I don't know how to really answer it, but there's an interesting overlap where they do combine. And I guess if you want to know more within the next year, you can read my 80 to 100,000 word thesis on it, if I eventually publish it.
Yeah. Here's another question about space or history. Do you prefer space or history?
It's a tough question, and I think of it like a seesaw, where absolutely, as my career has gone on, sometimes I have been in Egypt for a long time and thought, yes, this is for me. It would be wonderful if someone pays me to do this. And then I would come back to Australia and visit the Sydney Observatory or find a job like this, where I think absolutely space is the future. So I'm just very indecisive. At the moment, it seems like space is absolutely the way to go, and very exciting that so much is happening in the space sector, that humans are starting to go there, that launching satellites is reasonably affordable. South Australia will be launching a satellite within the next couple of years, and the Australian Space Agency has just granted launch facilities in Australia as well. So it's a very exciting time to be involved in space.
Yeah. We'll just play the video of Discover Your Career in Space. And we can ask maybe 1 or 2 questions right after the video.
Awesome. Come and get a space career.
What do you dream of doing with your future? Do you want to help people with a career in healthcare? To master a trade and build things with your hands? To be the next startup that invents a new piece of life-changing technology? Or to make a difference for our planet or people in need? Whatever your career ambitions, you can make them happen in space. When most people think about jobs in space, they think of astronauts, rocket scientists, and software engineers sitting in rooms with lots of computers. And in reality, thousands of different jobs on Earth come together to make every space achievement possible. There are the space researchers and scientists who investigate and test how we can do things safer, quicker, or further. The engineers who design spacecraft like satellites, from the mechanics through to the astronautics. Software developers who build and code the critical parts of space systems. And mathematicians and analysts, keeping everything running smoothly. There are also the aspiring entrepreneurs and startups, leveraging space technologies like the Internet of Things to solve challenges. The lawyers helping to regulate a constantly changing industry, and even the PR professionals, helping to share how space improves people's lives. Here in Australia, the space industry is growing quickly. In fact, it's expected that by 2030, there'll be 30,000 people working in space. By thinking about a career in space now, you can make the most of your future tomorrow. And the Australian Space Discovery Centre is where you can learn about exciting job roles, accessible study pathways, and the worlds of opportunity that await. See your future in space.
I think we just have time for one final question, unfortunately. What was the most difficult project that you've worked on at the Australian Space Agency?
Without a doubt, the most difficult part would be opening the Australian Space Discovery Centre. It was a thing that wonderfully we had a wonderful team of people from the agency and from Questagon who helped bring it together. But there was a large process of onboarding staff. We now have a wonderful team who help spread the message of space. And now we're figuring out how we operate on a daily basis, how we'll start to bring schools in, as well as how we will start to reach out to a more national audience. So again, discover.space.gov.au is the window for everyone at the moment. We add more to the page constantly, so check it out to learn more about how space affects your everyday life and possible career pathways.